The Talk Station presents Faith Matters, a look at contemporary stories and issues from a faith perspective. While this is a pre-recorded show, we are interested in your ideas, comments, and questions, and we urge you to email them to faithmatters@thetalkstation.com.
Give me faith, trust what you say, that you're good and your love is great. I'm broken inside, I give you my life.
And now on the Talk Station, Faith Matters.
And welcome to our program, Faith Matters, here on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. And I'm Ben Ball, along with Reverend Robert Corngate from Chapel by the Sea in Emerald Isle, and Reverend Carl Zarowski from St. Peter's United Methodist Church. And Bishop Doc Loomis is not with us today. He's working on his drive-through church. So that's a little inside story. All right, let's take a look at a couple of articles from this week and some other things that we may want to bring up in process. This is from a project that's called The Conversation, and it is funded, actually, this project is funded by a number of universities, and it's intended to bring people who are working on their doctorates and people who are working on various other projects together in the conversations about issues. This one is titled, Why There Are Costs to Moral Outrage. The opening paragraph. Many Americans are morally outraged that U.S. President Donald Trump fired former FBI Director James Comey, who had been investigating possible links between Trump's election campaign and Russian government. Many others are angry that Comey accused President Trump of lying about the FBI. Still others are mad that Trump then accused Comey of lying under oath before Congress. Soon something else will stoke people's moral outrage. A look at any partisan news source or any social media site will show that people expressing maximum anger at all hours of the day. And Robert, I think the key phrase there is maximum anger.
Yeah.
When outrage is sparked, it seems to be full bore.
Yeah. There used to be in our culture a sort of a civility, and there were rules of civility the way we talk to each other. And even when on these sort of outrageous incidents, we had been trained, through our school system and by our parents and others, and just in civil discourse, that there are some things you say and there's some things you don't say, and so if you can't say anything nice,
you don't say anything.
Don't say anything at all. I mean, I heard that growing up just about every day from my mother, and you took the feelings of the person that you were talking to into account. Now, how far you went on that was another thing, and there are definitely times when outrage must be expressed, but it's gotten to the point now that everything is an outrage. I only somewhat satirically say I blame C-SPAN for this, but I'll get to that in a second. But the second part of this article. It says, what explains all this outrage? The world isn't really getting worse, but people have incentives to act like it is. New technologies are giving virtually anyone at any given moment a platform to express anger. These are new forms, ways of communication, from Twitter to Facebook, allow anyone to express outrage at their newest political dust-up or celebrity gaffe. And by expressing anger in this way, people are able to communicate something about themselves, so they are morally sensitive, that they care about injustice so much that they are willing to accept the cost of being upset to show it. Carl, this again, these writers of this article blame, or not blame, but point to social media, technologies. Certainly, it's kind of the old thing, you could write things that you would never say.
Right. You can speak, you can keep a certain level of anonymity. Mm-hmm. If I was morally outraged at something you did and I had to speak to you face to face, I have to be willing to accept the consequences of what happens as soon as those words leave my mouth. If I'm in the confines of my home at my desk and I just tap, tap, tap on the computer, and then I can say whatever I want, and then if I want, I can just turn it off and walk away.
Mm-hmm. These authors call it a phenomenon, moral grandstanding, They go on to say, here's the basic idea. Grandstanders used to use talk about justice, rights, or morality in general to show that they are good people. Grandstanders want others to think that they care more about justice or empathize more deeply with the poor or more clearly understand the plight of the factory worker than the average person. Some are more modest, and some just want to show that they're on the right side of history. For grandstanders, moral and political discourse is a vanity project.
Yeah, the new term is virtue signaling. That's what they've come up with, virtue signaling. And which is, you're more virtuous than anyone else. And so you're getting your virtue credentials out there for everyone to see. And, I think
accomplish.
Yeah, pardon me.
Nothing necessarily has to change.
That's right.
In the subject of your outrage.
But it is a I think a symptom. This is a symptom of a shift in our culture and in culture in general, where we've moved. It used to be when you had a conversation or an argument, if you want to call it that, or a debate, you grounded it on evidence. You you had reasons, and they were grounded in reality rather than just a feeling that you had, and so inside of you that was creating this outrage. And so that in a one-on-one conversation, you had to be able to, go back and forth. And now we've gone to this ad hominem attack, which means that you attacked not the principles or the issues, you attack the person.
Right.
And so that person is degraded. You're actually lowering them in their moral standing and raising yourself up.
Right.
And, the biblical admonition is don't think more highly of yourself. Prefer one another. And it's absolutely the contrary. So I take a little issue with that thing that our world is not getting worse. I think we've lost this. Generationally, we've seen this slippage.
It's an underpinning.
As we've lost that foundation of let's use logic and reason and rational discussion to work through these issues rather than just firebrand my way or the highway stuff.
When I like to follow Congress and politics and things like that. So when C-SPAN won the right to broadcast in the House and then broadcast elements of the Senate, that just gave a grandstanding platform to an empty chamber. They would occasionally pan over, you'd see it was an empty chamber, but they could get on tape, they could get on video, so the TV stations at home could play it, so they would have a record of it being played. And then we have, during the sessions now, we see a lot of grandstanding going on in order to make the news, to make a news clip. And so that's my blame C-SPAN for some of this. This is, but the cost of outrage that this article points out, I think it's an important point here. It says, in and of itself, outrage may not be all that bad. Expressions of anger can be very effective at identifying bad things in the world and motivating us to address them. But to use outrage effectively, we must protect it. It's like temper it. Otherwise, when anger could be used to help people see something is wrong, displays of outrage will just sound like more of the same. In other words, it just is noise after a while. Right, Carl?
Right. It's just noise. And you look in the scriptures, you see a lot of, whenever you read about what anger does to you in the scriptures, it usually follows with, it makes you look like a fool, or it makes you look foolish. Okay. And if Robert and I got into an argument, there comes a point where I quit listening to Robert and he quits listening to me, and it just becomes both of us grandstanding. When I watch the news now and you have somebody on there and then a couple of guests, and they begin with very civil discourse. But by the time they get to the end of it, everybody is just shouting at one another.
I don't watch any program with multiple heads.
Yeah, nobody is listening anymore, and nothing gets accomplished. I look at what the book of James says, where it admonishes us to be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. because human anger doesn't produce the righteousness that God desires. So all of these people, I mean, I understand moral outrage, okay, but are you following it up with anything? Or are you just getting up and yelling and making a lot of noise and walk around feeling very self-righteous? Or are you going to follow that up with some type of action to bring about change?
Yeah. Yeah, we used to call it righteous indignation.
Righteous indignation.
And what is righteous indignation? You know, there is a place for it.
Absolutely.
That is tied to reality, to the biblical worldview, and that there are things that are done that we should be righteously indignant about.
Because in your indignation, you also are pointing a path that could be taken.
Yeah.
Right.
You know?
Well,
Right.
I always think about Goliath and David. And why did David attack Goliath? Because Goliath had attacked his God, David's God, the only true God, and had said terrible things about him. And David didn't say a word back to Goliath, but he picked up 5 smooth stones, and he acted against that in his moral indignation.
And all it took was one stone.
That's right.
More to come in a moment here on Faith Matters on the talk station FM 107 and AM 1240. Welcome back here on Coastal Daybreak on the talk station FM 107 and AM 1240. Thanks for joining us once again. I'm Ben Ball, along with Reverend Robert Zornicki, Robert Cornegie. We were just all conflating names earlier, so that's it. And Reverend Carl Zorowski. We're going to put all those together.
Korowski.
Zornicki and Korowski.
Kornegowski.
Yes. He's from that other region. Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Let's
You
take a
gotta
look.
fit ball in there somehow. I don't know.
No. That's always at the end. Let's take a look at another article here. We were just talking about moral outrage and the cost of moral outrage. And here we come to an article out of CNBC. Mark Zuckerberg, Facebook can play a role that churches in Little League once filled. And this is by John Chanel on CNBC, and talks about, just the opening line is pretty good. Mark Zuckerberg wants Facebook groups to play an important role that community groups like churches and Little League teams used to perform, bringing communities together. And with nearly 2 billion people around the world on Facebook today, he might have a chance to make that happen. Zuckerberg laid out his lofty ambition in a Chicago speech last week that suggests Americans are in need of something to unify their lives. His quote, "It's so striking that for decades, memberships of all kinds of groups have declined as much as 1/4, he said during a rally for Facebook users who built large community support groups on the site. That's a lot of people who now need to find a sense of purpose and support somewhere else. People who go to church are more likely to volunteer and give to charity, not just because they're religious, but because they're part of a community. A church doesn't just come together. It has a pastor who cares for the well-being of their congregation, makes sure they have food and shelter. A Little League team has a coach who motivates the kids and helps them hit better. Leaders set the culture, inspire us, give us a safety net, and look out for us." Carl, we should be looking out for Mark Zuckerberg to come to a community near you?
Well, I'm reading this and I'm thinking, I don't need the church anymore, right? I can just find everything I need in that bassoon group that I joined on Facebook, right?
Right. Your whole community, your safety net.
Yeah. What's troubling here is where he's seeing that churches and Little League once filled a need, and he's not seeing that need being fulfilled there anymore. I'm not sure that Mark Zuckerberg fully understands what the church is, because we're not just a benevolent organization. We are a group of people whose lives have been transformed by the power of Jesus Christ, who are out to now transform the world and invite others to experience that transformation for themselves.
Yes, but like you said, he not sure that he understands it. I think it's clear that he doesn't.
Right,
But
right.
then again, there's a lot of people, Robert, that don't understand that role of the church and do look at it as a benevolent organization, and it's just one of many.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because we tend to think of Facebook as an American phenomenon,
Right,
But it's not.
No, it's definitely
No.
worldwide.
Yeah, it's billions. I mean, we're millions. We're talking billions of people. And so if you're looking for something that can, transcend location, transcend time, I mean, the Facebook is there 24/7.
Right.
The Facebook. Capital T.
Yeah.
And the Facebook is able to connect people in a way that, just as we were talking about this outrage and how social media has lit that fire, because you're really not in direct contact with people physically.
Yes.
It's electronically, and so that there's a distance to it. So he's claiming, I mean, the thing about church and Little League and Rotary Club and the Elks and all this other stuff is that it's people getting together physically
Right.
to do things and to accomplish things.
The
church is unique. It's not a social.
Community isn't virtual; it's real.
It's real. I mean, you actually live among these people. Well, Facebook is just a pinprick on reality. I mean, it's just you can control how much of it you want and whatnot, and you have no connection with those people that are around you. I mean, I know gamers feel like when they get on and they're playing with all these people from all over the world, really, that they have this community, but it's not real community. It's not even near what he's talking about.
Oh no!
Right.
I mean, look at it. I think I'll look at my own sons as millennials, one more than the other, though. But they refer to their good friends,
Right.
they've never met.
Yeah.
And what is the safety net that he speaks of in this kind of a community? Is it?
There is none. Not that I can see, because
we all use Facebook.
We all use Facebook.
Yeah.
But when I am feeling a part of a community on Facebook, the reality is I am sitting by myself alone somewhere on a smartphone or a tablet or something like that, and I'm not physically connected to those other people. I believe that God created us to live in community with one another. And that's one of the beautiful things about the church. Yes, in communion with one another, have a shared life.
Yeah.
It's fascinating too that he describes this community of the church, that the leader of the church is the pastor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, that's not what the church is.
The pastor is the servant of the church.
Yeah.
Well, and it's Jesus's church. I mean, you talk about a higher authority. Mm-hmm. He's kind of classifying this community called the church or Little League. He used both of those examples, and that the authority in it is the pastor, and the authority in Little League is the coach. Well, that's not what the church. Now, that may be true in Little League, but in the church, it's not, because we have a higher authority that's above that. That we, as pastors, we're all three pastors, are servant leaders,
right,
of the church. We serve Christ in a leadership role, but it's not top down. It's, we serve the congregation, the people that God has drawn to that community. Yeah, we help them develop their relationship with God. So it passes beyond us. It doesn't stop at us. And this is pretty scary. This is kind of that you need to have an authority, and that's why we see
who is he seeing as that authority.
Well, it's either going to be in a how does government fit into this?
Well, in his case, he's talking about how does artificial intelligence fit into it.
Well, that's the other bit. Yeah, that's the really scary part.
Is that through artificial intelligence, through their algorithms, they can help people identify groups that they may have an affinity with.
Yeah.
And that's frightening.
Because if you can manipulate that algorithm to move people toward a certain group.
We've all seen that movie.
Yeah.
and the way I remember, it didn't work out real well. There was eventually a revolution that took place. Yeah, but it is fascinating that we have a personality, a very wealthy man who is dreaming these dreams. When you kind of look at what is his vision of where social media and all that is going, it's crossing all the boundaries.
And we have already talked today about how social media has almost destroyed civil discourse between individuals. Okay, so are we going to become a society where we no longer even speak to one another face to face? Because we don't have to, because we have the Facebook.
If you're not in my group, if you're not in my circle, you don't really exist to me. You're just out there.
Well, and we're experiencing.
And I'll just unfriend you.
Well,
yeah.
Well, we're experiencing where people have narrowcast their lives, so that they only in a poll. Typical broadcasting, for example, news was always a push.
That's right.
But now we can pull whatever we want out of it. So, in a typical pull nature of media, of what social media is now, we can pull together only the things that we will already have agreed with the first time we see it. So.
Yeah, and there are names for that. Our little bubbles. We create our own little bubbles, or our silos, or our little spheres. And we narrow it down.
Myopic.
And and the church is just the opposite.
Right.
The church is to be the one that goes out to the hurting, to the ones unlike us.
Right, to leave our circle and draw them invite them into it.
Yeah, and to reach out to them. And that's completely contrary to what he's saying.
And again, one of the difficulties with making that work, I mean, he is right in talking about these groups having physical groups having declines, while these virtual groups are expanding.
Right.
There's less risk involved in a virtual group. There's no risk involved.
You choose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Here's a comment on our society and where we are. Back when John Lennon said that the Beatles were bigger than Jesus, there was moral outrage all over the place. Here, Zuckerberg is basically saying Facebook is more important than the church, and we're not hearing the outrage.
Well,
and that place is where we are. Our influence in this, and how much of that influence is drawn by our own inability to draw lines of morality.
Yeah,
instead of that firm sand of morality, we've drizzled into a puddle, and so there's no firm line in many churches, I'm afraid. So,
and we're just as a warning, we're already seeing that Twitter, Facebook, MySpace, all the MySpace is pretty much gone.
Yeah,
but
Snapchat,
and all of them. There's ones we don't even know about, but that they are actually starting to edit content in what is they allow to be spoken.
And the algorithms
will clean all that up. Yeah. That's right.
Yeah. Again, more to come in a moment here on Faith Matters on the Talk Station FM 107 and AM 1240. Welcome back to Faith Matters here on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240, and I'm Ben Ball, along with Reverend Carl Zarowski and Reverend Robert Cornegie. And our next article that we're going to take a look at is from Anthony Fiola and Stephanie Kirchner. It comes in the Washington Post. And the headline is, "In Germany, a new feminist Islam is hoping to make a mark." Inside the red brick building that now houses the German capital's newest and perhaps most unusual mark, Seren Ates is staging a feminist revolution of the Muslim faith. Allahu Akbar chanted a female voice during Arabic is great, as a woman with two-toned hair issued the Muslim call to prayer. In another major break with tradition, men and women, typically segregated during worship, heeded the call by sitting side by side on the carpeted floor. This is not the first one, but it is, I guess, in Germany is the first of what's called progressive mosques, where women are elevated into equals in the mosque, and it has had pushback from imams and other sects. But what do you think, Robert? When we look at this, this mosque and how they are choosing to express their Islamic faith as Christians, are we welcoming this? Are we just standing back to watch? What do you think?
I think we're watching. I know I am. I'm not trying. I really can't make an opinion on this. I mean, I think this, like you said, this has happened in Western society. This is the only place. You're not going to find this in Beirut.
I think they say there's one in Canada, maybe.
Yeah, it's going to be in a Western liberal, in the old term of liberal culture, pluralistic culture, where they've had an opportunity to mix with, and be influenced by Christianity primarily, and so they're adapting to kind of fit better in that cultural setting. It's a culturalization process. But if you go over into the Islamic world, you're not going to find these. I mean, they may do it in a little hidden place, an underground place, but it's not going to be an underground mosque.
The article does state some demographics for it. It says in London, for instance, the female-founded Inclusive Mosque Initiative opened its doors in 2012. Also says that their more recently mixed gender or all-female prayers have spread to boutique mosques from California to Switzerland to Denmark. And so
Western culture.
Yes, there are some.
Yeah.
Now, it's interesting, Carl, I think, for us, because would we see this kind of progressive liberal Islam being perhaps less dangerous, less violent, or do we know yet?
I don't think we know yet.
Or potentially dangerous, potentially violent.
Yeah, I don't think we know yet. But this is sort of a nice feel good aspect of Islam that maybe we have not seen. I have only attended one Muslim service in my life, and it was a funeral for the mother of a friend of mine from Turkey. It was maybe 20 years ago. And I know when my wife and I got to the funeral home, the first thing that happened was some gentleman came and took my wife away from me and made her stand in the back of the room while all the men went up to the front of the room. And it was fascinating to me to see this separation. My wife was not on board with this at all. But I thought, well, this is very different. This is how they do things. I respect that. Okay. And I know that in the, in the Christian faith, there are a lot of churches that still will not ordain females as clergy. The United Methodist Church didn't do so until 1956. Right. Okay. And so you can see that sort of change happening. In the Bible, the Old Testament, women were basically property. In the New Testament, in Luke's Gospel, all of a sudden we see Jesus acting like they matter. And when he was resurrected, who was the first one to go and proclaim that Jesus was raised from the dead? It was a woman.
Yeah, the woman. That's right.
Yeah. Now, is this the issue here, or is this about maybe a softening of Islamic tenets that we'd want to see?
I don't think this is coming down from on high. I don't think this is a strategy to slip in, whether it's above board or overt or covert, liberalization. I think this is I mean, the woman that was part of the founding, she's been working on this for
a while,
decades,
right.
And has just come into this. And
the chairman of the Islamic Council for the Federal Republic of Germany dismissed it as a fad.
Yeah. You read the comments later on after the article, and it's pretty interesting how it comes on both sides. But for the true believers, if there is a, I'm concerned that the violent reaction is going to be towards them rather than
we've
liberalizing in the culture.
We've seen factions of Islam fighting each other, certainly.
Exactly.
But this one seems to be much more of a theological fight.
Yeah. The jihadist movement, I don't think it's going to be real tolerant of this process. So yeah, I mean, it's a very bold thing they're doing. We'll see. I think we need to watch this progression, and Washington Post is generally a fairly progressive leaning newspaper. So they're presenting it maybe as a phenomenon that we need to encourage.
Right.
And so maybe we'll just watch and see how this thing develops.
And we also understand that, as none of us here are adherents or adhere to Islam. There's a lot about the faith that we don't know. All right. And what we know as outsiders. But we've all got a pretty good understanding of how they view homosexuality. But yet in this new church, it's very inclusive, and homosexuals, gays, lesbians, whatever, they are invited to come in and worship. And you're certainly not going to see that, in Iraq.
In the Middle East.
Or Iran. Never going to happen.
No, it's not going to happen.
Yeah. Now, but it's I think you could draw a sociological, maybe historical parallel even to Judaism. You look at Judaism in the diaspora as far as even post-World War II, after going ahead and establishing the State of Israel. And then you have the Reform Jews, though,
Correct.
that are more there are more of them than there are those in Israel.
Conservative, right.
And they're in the United States and in Europe and other places. And yet they are theologically at odds on many respects. Well, can these two and they still coexist? They still call themselves brothers and sisters. So can this happen with a progressive Islam?
Well, could it be that we're going to see a break in Islam and a new religion start here? It could happen, because it's a lot of it is going to be based on their interpretation of their scriptures. There are those who are taking to Twitter right now and calling this mosque a mosque without Islam.
Right.
And they say that those who know her know that she's in favor of an Islam that is not based on its sources. So, even in the Christian church, we don't all agree on what the scriptures say. And a lot of that is why there are still churches that will not have women pastors.
Yeah, and many. So this, I think, is an interesting phenomenon, whether or not it's actually a phenomenon or, as they said, it's a fad.
Yeah, I'd say this is sort of probably right now a sort of fringe movement, if you will, on the very outskirts of the faith. And they have that form, just like that guy said, they have the form of godliness, Allah'ness, but deny the power of. And so that's, I think, where that struggle is. And it'll be interesting to see where this thing goes. Yeah.
If in Germany and London and California or any of these other places, this actually remains a foothold for a decade or more, will it have influence? Will it then gain influence on other parts of society, and how will they relate to their neighbors as Christians? Yeah,
well, just like the Reformed Church, the Reformed Judaism, and it has in a Western context, it has influence. It's grown and established and whatnot. I think you may see it in Western culture, but back in the home country, how far does this penetrate back into sort of the Mecca? The Middle East is going to be the question, I think.
And we remember too that the Reformation And the formation of the Protestant church didn't happen overnight and did not happen without a squabble or two.
Yeah, pretty serious squabbles.
Yes, as we are in the 500th anniversary of that. Squabble.
That's right.
But you know, there's also an interesting sideline here too. If we're looking at a church that is going to be more inclusive, is going to look at people from all walks of life, it's going to be perhaps less as their counterparts in Iraq or Saudi Arabia or some other places would see them being as less orthodox, right?
Right.
Yet we struggle with our churches perhaps trying to be more orthodox and looking at taking our faith seriously. You know, is this a serious look at faith, or is it again a faddish thing that's going to draw some headlines?
That's a great question. I mean, in one of the articles, it talks about the statistics of what's happening in the church, and that those churches that back in the early 20th century started compromising to try to be more inclusive and to more welcome, you know, to attract, and so they lowered the bar, let's say, and now we're seeing that those are the ones that they're falling away. They're the ones that are losing. The kind of the mainline denominations are the ones that are struggling now to hold themselves together, and so and the evangelical ones and Pentecostal and charismatic ones are the ones that are growing, and so it's
going to be worth observing.
Exactly.
See how this goes. More to come in a moment here on Faith Matters on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. Welcome back here on Faith Matters on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. And I'm Ben Ball, along with Reverend Robert Cornegie and Reverend Carl Zarowski. And our final segment today is a difficult subject. It talks about euthanasia. This is an article out of Church Militant. Dutch euthanasia pioneer disturbed by kill rates. From The Hague in the Netherlands, the pioneer for legalized euthanasia in the Netherlands is denouncing a lack of ethics as legal safeguards for vulnerable patients as legal safeguards erode. Dutch euthanasia pioneer and psychiatrist, I'm not going to be able to pronounce the name, Boudewijn Chabot, how about that, wrote an opinion piece Friday that described the worrisome rate at which dementia and psychiatric patients are killed. He claims that the legal safeguards are protecting the vulnerable are being quietly eroded. He also claims panels reviewing the requests are concealing incidents of wrongful death. Chabot is most worried about the increase in euthanasia among dementia patients. While he considers the number to be relatively small, 141 killed in 2016, diagnostic tests are identifying age-related chronic psychiatric diseases earlier. Thus, with this more often leads to large increase in the number of patients with incurable conditions. You know, we wrestle with this subject anytime that we have somebody in our church who is critically ill and who is anywhere near death, maybe in hospice care, maybe those subjects almost always come up one way or another. Does this have to keep on going? And so this isn't necessarily the subject of euthanasia. This is the one who pioneered it, saying we've slipped down that slope, right, Carl?
Right. They came up with a solution. And now they're seeing consequences of the solution that they weren't expecting, and they're uncomfortable with it. You know, I read this article, I see, the way it's written, it doesn't say that there were 141 euthanized, which sounds so much nicer. It says there were 141 killed in 2016. And that brings it down to what it is. The people are killed, either by their own hand or by somebody else. The way I understand with this, with the organization that this article talks about, End of Life Clinic, I think is what it's called. Yeah. That what they do is they assist the individual, but the individual does the action themselves.
Well, if they're capable of doing
it,
but then they will do it.
Right,
if they'll do it for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Since its legalization, the Netherlands has steadily loosened its restrictions on assisted suicide. In 2016, it looked to expanding the age range for children to be euthanized, broadening it from age 12 all the way down to age 1. This is, Robert, I mean, you have been in the abortion battle for a long time.
Long time.
You know, one of the things I look at this story is how similar this is to Roe, the person who was Roe and Roe v. Wade, how then they saw the error of that, and tried to preach against it,
and how used, manipulated she was in the process. And we've talked about this before on the show, and you know, we've always said that the continuum of life, you know, is something that is in God's hands as believers. Mm-hmm. This God is the giver of life. God is the taker of life. God is the restorer of life. God heals. God is able to intervene on these things. And so what we're seeing is that secularization, a consequence. This is, ideas have consequences. And when you say that the government is the legal authority over our lives rather than God, that we have certain rights that are not given by government, that in fact government is required to protect those rights. And it's codified in America as that first one, the most important one. If you don't have the right to life, it doesn't matter about the others. So that begins in the womb and it goes to the, you know, womb to tomb, and how that transition into life, that transition out of life. And the church has basically, there's no voice of the church in this. This is a technical, medical
procedure,
right?
Financial decision. It has nothing to do with morality or ethics or any of those metaphysical positions. And so we see this battle going on, and this culture of death that we often talk about. We've gone from a culture of life, and we see this slide down the slippery slope to this culture of death, where death, and in fact it says it in the article, that it's become a virtue. The ones who work in these clinics, these end-of-life clinics, that they see killing these people is a virtuous act. I'm sorry, the Hippocratic Oath is very clear about this stuff. And going back time immemorial, that you do not do this. These are the innocent. And how do we stop that slide? This is a big question.
In this article, it says Chabot, who was one of the pioneers of this, notes that dementia patients are put to death mostly by doctors at the end-of-life clinics, not in hospitals. He says since the standards for physical illnesses are being used for psychiatric illnesses, the clinic psychiatrists won't need to enter into a treatment relationship with patients before prescribing death. A psychiatrist himself, he says it's difficult to determine if a death wish is serious and enduring, even with a patient-developed patient-doctor relationship. It says you can't trust what they say, is what he's saying.
Correct.
You can't trust the patient to diagnose themselves.
Well, I can think of when I was younger, I had some pretty major surgery, and I was in horrendous pain afterward. And I remember lying in that hospital bed just praying, God, let me die, because I can't go another minute. Okay, right. But now here I am, 40 years later. I'm glad he didn't take me. I'm glad that I didn't have that as an option, you know. One of the things that troubled me the most about this article was when I saw the statistics of how many people have died through this euthanasia in the Netherlands. The article was, or this actually on the website of the clinic. They say, you know, relatively small 4% of the deaths in the Netherlands have been through euthanasia. And I'm thinking 4%, that's 1 out of 25 people who have died in the Netherlands. Somebody made a decision that it was time for that life to end. Somebody was playing God. And in a lot of those cases, it's the individual saying, God, you gave me this gift of life, and I am rejecting it.
Right.
This is this is also the example where they go back to this issue, the abortion issue, others, where the slippery slope is now they're now sliding down it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's right. And they're basing their decisions on information. They don't have the whole information. And so Oregon right now has a very active youth program where the assisted suicide, and and it's catching on. Montana has developed one, and we're seeing it in other states as it goes through. And it's a very emotional thing to go through this. I mean, we've all been on the deathbed
at a bedside.
I mean, it's incredible. It's probably one of the most powerful moments I can remember for both, particularly the family, but that person as they leave this realm, and particularly those that are saved. You know their destiny, and they have fought the good fight all the way to the end. And now God is calling them home, their time. And to put that decision in the hands of a
death panel
is a horrifying thought. I don't want, it's interesting that the guy that's the pioneer of this program, in one of the comments, they said he's 76 years old. And he's realizing it's out of his hands. His destiny is now in the hands, in Holland, in the Netherlands, of a panel of people that are going to determine when it's time for him to go.
Yeah. I mean, when we talk in this program, we talk about artificial intelligence. We talk about any number of other issues here, too. But this one is one that we have talked about since the beginning. And this is very difficult. And we're confronted with it all the time. My own dad, said, he said to a doctor, "Can't you do something to make this end?" But he had another week to live. And during that week was a very important week for me, for our relationship, in fact. And then, but I've heard many people talk about that on a deathbed. And it's going to be a struggle for all of us as pastors, as Christians, as family members. We're always going to struggle with this thing. But there are answers that don't involve this.
That's right. And we as Christians, we have this belief in this hope that there is something beyond that ending. And I hope that when I get to that point, that I'm on my deathbed, that my eyes are focused solely on what's going to come next, and that's going to help me to get through the now.
It's a powerful, powerful experience to watch.
Thank you for joining us on this week's Faith Matters here on the Talk Station. Thank Reverend Robert Cornegy and Reverend Carl Zarowski, and I'm Ben Ball. We'll see you next week.
Thank you for joining us for Faith Matters. Email your comments, questions, and suggestions to faithmatters@thetalkstation.com.
Give me faith, trust what you say, that you're good and your love is great. I'm broken inside, I give you my life. Give me faith.
Faith Matters is a production of the Talk Station.